Ypres, Belgium, April 22 of 1950. On this day, German artillery suddenly shuts down in the busiest section of the Western Front. Suddenly, a greenish-yellow cloud began to approach from the German trenches. After a while, it covered the fighting positions of the Allied forces. Shortly after, thousands of people began to scream in cramps, experiencing excruciating asphyxiation. Unprotected, the British and French soldiers left their positions in panic. It was the first chemical attack in history that was successfully carried out. Over 5,000 people died as a result of chlorine poisoning. However, Kaiser Germany, the gas user, had no special chemical services, no local production facilities or research institutes in the area. There weren't even schools for training military chemists. All the terrible business has been taken over by German entrepreneurs. The gases were produced at the chemical plants of Aqua Hoist AG at the world-famous company Bayer AG. Preliminary studies were carried out at a private institution, the Kaiser Wilhelm Society, under the sensitive guidance of the future Nobel laureate in chemistry, Fritz Geber, who was also a senior employee of the commercial company Baden Einleine and Soda Factory, or simply BASF. Geber is not only considered to be the father of chemical weapons, he personally supervised the first chlorine warfare on that day. His wife Clara Geber committed suicide when she found out what her husband was responsible for. But Dr. Geber still had no intention of giving up his favorite cause. The very next morning he went to the Eastern Front to assist another chemical attack against the Russians. In 1922, after the war, the famous pesticide Cyclone B was invented under his leadership. Gas will kill over 1 million people during World War II. Subsequently, feeling guilty about his father's scientific research, his son, Hermann Geber, also committed suicide just like his mother. For training the military chemists, businessmen created a gas school in Leverkusen, where the Bayer AG plant was located. Aqua Hoist, Bayer AG and BASF formed the basis of the future IG Farben cartel a bit later, during the first years of World War I. These companies had taken over most of the tasks of the Army's Chemical Corps. In general, the history of German capitalization begins somewhere in the second half of the 19th century. Free market relations sooner or later lead to a concentration of capital, which in turn lead to market monopolization and ultimately to the suppression of all competition. During the 70s of the 19th century was established the highest number of business alliances in the entire history. First, the alliances had rather trivial goals, such as organization of logistics defending common interests before the authorities, fighting against workers and regulating their business relations. But later, towards the end of the century, the main issue for most German businesses, the main issue for most German businessmen was the problem of protective duties. Basically, the alliance began lobbying at the state level for the necessary laws that would restrict the import of goods from competitors. The story of IG Farben's rise begins in the 1860s. In 1863, Hoist AG and Bayer AG were founded, then BASF in 1865 and Aqua in 1867. In the future, these companies will go down in history as the economic core of Nazi Germany. Already in 1877, with the participation of these companies, the German Chemical Industry Protection Society was established. The society tasks were exactly the same as those of many other similar associations: to consult the state on the best decisions for the industry. But this was not a cartel yet. A cartel is a conspiracy of a group of businessmen for not only to suppress their competitors, but also to organize the oppression of workers in their companies. The cartel has a system of strict rules, quotas on productions and sale, on raw materials purchase, fixed tariffs on transactions, etc. In short, a cartel is an organized way of production invented by a group of capitalists. Kind of partially planned economy within individual enterprises. Eventually, the commercial collusion results in cost reduction, guaranteed markets, organized competition against the competitors and workers, and overall budget for lobbying, industry, and class interests. Right to the World War I, Germany was a leader in economic cartelization. Read more about in this book. The chemical industry also did not stand aside. As early as 1904, the industry was already dominated by only 6 companies that had joined together in 2 tripartite alliances: Bayer AG, BASF, Agfa versus Hoist AG, Kaseya, and Kalle. In Germany, such alliances named after this German word. Let everyone try to pronounce it for themselves. In abbreviation from it sound like IG and roughly translated common interest. These companies were interested in photographic accessories, pharmacy, synthetic rubber, oil, nitrate, technical oils, lubricants, fertilizers, explosives, and poisonous gases. Of course, at the start of the World War I, Germany controlled 85% of world chemical production. So the war has begun. The First World Imperialist War. A week after the outbreak of hostiles, a man with a rather gloomy message appeared in the office of German War Minister Erich von Falkenhayn. According to him, the German General Staff is making a big mistake counting solely on the flash-like strategy of the war. The German industry relies on a number of strategically important raw materials such as nitrates, oil, rubber, and many metals that only can be produced aboard. The British and French are aware of this vulnerability, which means that a blockade, raw material suffocation, and immediate defeat will be expected in Germany. The minister's interlocutor was Walter Rittenau, a well-known industrialist and head of the German Electricity and Equipment Group General Electric Company. But he came not to cause panic, but to propose a solution. Rittenau wanted the General Staff to involve entrepreneurs in the military planning. He recommended establishing of a control system that would include rationing supplies as well as priority system in order to save limited stocks of strategic raw material. General Falkenhayn was convinced by the businessman arguments, and he ordered the establishment of the Department of Military Raw Materials within the Ministry of Defense, of which Rittenau himself was appointed a head. Without wasting time, the businessman staffed the service he was entrusted with by a group of selected scientists and industrialists. Under Rittenau's pressure, the Directorate immediately carried out a survey of 900 companies producing military materials. The result of survey confirmed worst fears. The German industry had no more than 6 months' worth of important raw materials. As a result, it was decided to put an economy on a planned basis. All companies involved in military production were forced to participate in cartelization. This meant that all market competition in the military industry was simply prohibited, and everyone who had not previously been a member of cartels was forced to join it. The new agency strictly regulated the supply of raw materials to companies and set mandatory prices and quotas for the production. In order to achieve maximum product growth, Rittenau started assigning certain production tasks to certain plants. This led to checking office books and violating the principle of trade secret and treating individual industries as a single entity regardless of the situation. situation at individual plants. Despite the severe centralization of entire German military economy, it remained in the hands of the merchants themselves. Rathenau's main supporters were more influential industrialists and top managers. For example, the already well-known chemist Fritz Haber, his colleague Karl Bosch, Hermann Schmitz, Hugo Stinnes, Karl Duisberg, Bayer, and many others. This meant that most of the orders and therefore most of the profits came from the companies whose representatives worked in the raw materials department of Rathenau. And since no one invited small and medium-sized producers there were for obvious reasons, all orders went to the largest industrialists in Germany, making government contracts for themselves and forcing the companies to take its own cartel less on your own terms became a priceless find by German magnates. The planned economy had undoubtedly great success. Yes, Germany lost the war anyway, but if it hadn't been for innovations in organization and planning, the country would have collapsed in 6 months. Such an efficient and at the same time profitable economy could not but affect the minds of bourgeois ideologists and large capitalists. Already during the war we see not only the first rudiments of the future national capitalism, but also the outline of future Goebbels' demagogy, replacing the word capitalism with the word socialism, which was so popular at the time. A new type of state socialism is emerging that is completely different from what we thought or dreamed about. The private economic initiative and private capitalist economy will not be liquidated, but will be regulated from the point of view of state socialism, in which the concentration of capital will take place in the national economy and this capital will have a common direction. This shift of capitalism naturally and logically demands for a reshaping of the movement that was previously a counterbalance to it, international socialism. The latter will become a national socialism whose editorial slogan will be "Work, not love races." Werner Dietz, German chemist, head of one of the IG plants, 1916. Werner Dietz expressed his views exactly in 1916 for a particular reason. At this time, the German chemical industry reached the highest concentration of capital in its history. The two chemical cartels formed in 1904 finally merged into a single one, IG Farben. Or here's another example, the communizm. One of the managers of the Rathenau Materials Bureau was an industrialist, Hugo Stinnes. Stinnes was a fervent nationalist and an active supporter of German expansion. He led a hostile takeover of companies in the occupied territories of France and Belgium, right up until the equipment was removed and exported to Germany. He is also responsible for the forced shipment of tens of thousands of workers from these areas to factories in Germany. In other words, he is responsible for organizing slavery that violated every possible convention of those times. Later on, Stinnes' method served as a prototype for Hitler, IG Farben, and other major industrialists in dealing with the economies of the conquered countries. Of course, neither Dietz, nor Stinnes, nor IG Farben, nor even Adolf Hitler invented National Socialism. Nazi ideology is perverted representation of all that German businessmen have faced in the course of the development, the acquired shortage of colonies, which has caused rapid aggression, the rapid growth of monopolies, and the suppression of all competition, as well as the strong labor movement that constantly threatens the wallets of capitalists, and finally, war as a super profitable business.